Welcome to EduPlanet 21's 10-Minute Tuesdays, a series of conversations with experts in education. We are speaking with authors of our Plus Learning Pathways to provide educators with actionable information in bite-sized pieces. My name is Claire Coop-Scott, and I'm with the content team at EduPlanet 21. Today, I'm delighted to be joined once again by Krista Leh, author of our series on social-emotional learning. Krista is an educational consultant and a 2012 ASCD Emerging Leader. She began her career nearly 20 years ago as a high school social studies teacher, and after 10 years in the classroom, she served as 5 years as an instructional technology and curriculum coach, assisting 36 data teams in curriculum design and development, as well as the meaningful integration of technology to support the curriculum. Welcome back to 10-Minute Tuesdays, Krista. It's a long introduction I get through.
Thanks, Claire. I'm happy to be back again.
So when we spoke last time, you gave us the basics of social emotional learning, or SEL, and focused on tips for the elementary classroom. During this conversation, I'd like to introduce our audience to the 5 components of social emotional learning and have you speak about the secondary classroom, which is where you started your career, which is great.
And I'm still working in supporting secondary classrooms in middle school. And so I love that you brought this up separately, because oftentimes middle school and high school students are working through a whole other set of social emotional situations than what our elementary students are dealing with.
So can you talk a little briefly about the 5 components of social emotional learning and how they work together?
Sure. In that first segment, we talked a little bit about the fact that middle school and high school teachers often feel that they need to be focusing on the content, and that needs to trump the social emotional aspects of what's happening in the learning community, because we often think, well, we're getting you prepared for school, for college, for the workforce. And those underlying social emotional skills are really what are essential to get the students ready to learn at their highest ability. And so oftentimes we look at the 40,000-foot view of social emotional learning as it's about relationships. And that can also be scary to teachers when you're talking about middle school students and high school students, because where is that line between what is professional and what is supporting students, or maybe what is crossing that line? And so if we look more closely at what is actually social emotional learning, it's not just about relationships and rapport that you have with kids, but it's helping them develop in 5 essential skills. And the first is having self-awareness. So how do they feel about things? How do they respond? What are their emotions? The second part of that is, how do they manage those emotions as they're feeling them? And are they making proper decisions that will help them be successful, or are they withdrawing, or are they exploding the emotions outwards, which is going to hinder not only their academic success, but also their relationships as well. The third part of that is social awareness. And so are they able to recognize what's happening in other people in terms of emotions, the empathy piece, the compassion piece. And then the fourth part is the relationship building. So that is, how are you building relationships, but then maintaining them as well, because the ebbs and flows of relationships, like, it's not perfect once you have a form of friendship, and that how do you navigate what that looks like so that you're there for each other through the ups and the downs. And then lastly, it's the responsible decision making. And I think that in the high school and the middle school, we often focus on responsible decision making and self-management, and what is the proper way to behave and to respond. But we often don't spend enough time focusing on self-awareness and social awareness. So we often get compliance in schools without the students understanding why that behavior is so important and how that's going to help them in the future.
So speaking specifically about middle and high school students and that atmosphere, what are some strategies that teachers can employ in their classroom to support these components?
It's very similar to what we shared in the elementary classroom, but I would really emphasize that the teachers, when they're ready, take a look in the learning paths, and there are social emotional learning standards that are there. And I know often people are like, oh, standards, and they don't want to dig into that. But the standards and the learning targets really help them understand what those 5 components should look like, sound like, and feel like in the classroom. So it's all about having not only good decision-making skills, but also, again, developing that empathy and being able to problem solve, and having an awareness around what are your strengths and your likes, and how can you partner with other people to complement you in your learning and in your own social and emotional growth. So I'd first recommend that for teachers to really get familiar with what social emotional learning is. The second thing that I would recommend is that we often put students into groups and have them collaborate and work together towards content goals. And we talk about how are they achieving those content goals, but we often don't focus on how the social emotional processes help them or hindered their work towards and progress towards those goals. So for instance, my now 11th grader came home in 8th grade and said, my math teacher doesn't teach me anything. And I'm like, tell me more about this, because you know how kids are. And he said, well, she just puts us into groups and gives us math problems and walks around the room, and she doesn't actually teach us. I said, well, she was teaching you. She just wasn't as explicit with it. And I wish that she had told them that the reason you're working into groups is because you need to learn how to problem solve together, collaborate, be able to have those conversations around, well, this is what I got. What did you get? And I have something different, instead of just being the sage on the stage up at the front of the room and saying, this is how you do it. And so she was there for the students when they needed her, but she wasn't going to rescue them and enable them by not allowing them to grapple with that work. And so I think for teachers, we need to be explicit about what we're doing with the students. And part of that is through the aha moments of social emotional learning.
I'm wondering if you could share a success story that you've had in a teacher or group of teachers that you've worked with, and kind of what they've done to be successful and how it's impacted student learning. Because in the end, that's what teachers feel like they're measured by, is how well have my students progressed. So I'd love to hear a success story or two.
If I may, I'd like to share a story that I experienced. Even though I'm not officially in the classroom at the moment, I'm in other people's classrooms. And I also work at a week-long leadership conference with students. And it starts on a Sunday and it ends on a Friday. And we're with the same group of students from 7:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. And they're with us as a full group. And so I work with a group of about 12 to 15 teenagers between the ages of 16, 17, and 18. And the whole idea is that we're helping them develop as a learning community throughout that week. And we really focus on social emotional learning and the cycle of group development. And so knowing that we have all these activities and they're geared for specific purposes, I know that I'm going to move these students through a cycle of group dynamics, through experiential learning that will focus on each of those 5 components. And oftentimes the groups come in and they're nervous and they don't know each other. But through the week, we'll do these activities. We'll focus on, what are your emotions and how do you respond when you get stressed, and how do you make sure that everybody's included? And before you jump into trying to solve an activity, do you talk about what your plan is? And so with this one particular group, and I was just looking through pictures, so it was in 2012, I had students who were working towards a common goal. And there was a blow up. They were angry. Somebody responded. They wanted to participate, and other people had already started working on this particular project. And so I usually give them a lot of leeway just to see how things go. And I came in and they were angry at each other and yelling. And so we sat down in a circle and we processed out what was going on, how people felt, how they responded. And it took 2 hours to process through this. But at the end of it, one of the students, his name was Gennaro, he was the one who kind of exploded first and started yelling at people. We all kind of calmed down. They came back together again, and we moved in to have dinner together. And it was his birthday. And so we had gotten him a cupcake that day, and we started singing to him, and he started crying. I'm like, oh no, what happened? I didn't mean to make you upset. And he said, I'm not upset. I'm really happy. And I'm so thankful that you guys still want to be my friend after the way that I yelled today. Because in my house and in my family, when people fight and yell like that, we don't talk to each other for days. And the fact that we were able to model that you can have a disagreement, you can make a mistake, but come back together again and support one another was this huge aha moment for him. And then there was another girl in the group, her name was Tina, and she looked over at me and she said, are we just dealing with all this stuff because we're kids and we don't know any better? And I had a laugh and I said, no, these are the experiences that you're going to have for the rest of your life with adults. And what you're doing now is learning these skills on how to navigate this so that you don't have these big blow-ups and that you know how to respond. And so that was a huge aha moment for me, that just processing those with kids and letting them see how we can maneuver through the social emotional aspects to all learn together was really powerful, because that's not always what's modeled for kids.
Great story. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have any other tips for our secondary teachers before we sign off for today? Any place that you would direct them for learning?
I would first direct them to the learning paths, because the learning targets and the strategies that are in there are really specific to working with our high school students and our middle school students, that we're preparing them for life after school, but they're not there yet. And so they might not have these skills. And so we can't expect them to have them. So please go to the learning paths. I've also designed a couple tips and tricks that you can download to be able to integrate social emotional learning right away. And then lastly, I would say, look at CASEL research, CASEL. It's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They've been doing research in SEL for decades, and it's really solid, reliable, valid research that can help you figure out what is an entry point in terms of debriefing SEL and processing it, and how to integrate it into core content areas. And so those are also some of the tips and tricks that I give you in the learning path as well.
Great. Thanks, Krista. I look forward to talking with you again.
Thanks, Claire.